Dzień dobry Państwu. Cieszę się, że jest Państwa tak wielu na tym porannym panelu.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am glad to see so many of you here during this morning panel. I'm Magdalena Sobkowiec. I will moderate this panel about biopreparations in the process of cultivating plants. And I will try to take you through this topic together with Ewa Kaniewicz from Biogen. You can, yes, applaud very much so, yes, obviously. Minister Andrzej Chodkowski, Chief Inspector of Plant Protection and Seed Protection. Marcin Mucha, Director of the Polish Association of Plant Protection. And Tomasz Domański, representing International Association of Biocontrol producers. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are talking whether microbiological preparations and natural fertilizers can replace chemical solutions. Why are we talking about that? We've been talking about that because we know that the Green Deal is coming, and that is why the first question to you. What is the legal situation at the moment, and what our farmers have to be prepared for, and what is being planned in the Brussels, and when these plans are going to be implemented? Over to you, Minister. All right, so I will try and answer this question. These plans are a certain vision of how agriculture should change, of how plant protection should change, of fertilizing, in order to reach environmental goals. It is a controversial topic because from farm to table strategy, which had certain assumptions initially, namely it was to limit threats connected with pesticide application, was boiled down to a simple mathematical formula that we are limiting that by 50%. We are limiting plant protection solutions by 50%. From the perspective of farmers, it is highly controversial because farmers believe it is a threat for food security, for running their businesses or running their farms. Luckily, well, perhaps I should not say luckily, because we are talking about biopreparations, about biological protection, but EU member states reacted quite decisively to that. And these reduction goals are still being discussed. And I believe that they will be changed in line with intentions of EU member states and farming communities. As for using biological protection or fertilizers, natural fertilizers, I'm a proponent of that because these are natural methods which can help to improve quality of food, contribute to environmental protection, and I'm a proponent of integrated methods, so using methods which are checked, well-tested, chemical methods which are the most efficient, yet following all the safety requirements, and then agrotechnical methods, biological methods. I believe there is a great future ahead of this sector. And what's the legal situation? At the moment, the regulation on application or sustainable application of plant protection solutions is being discussed at the moment. So as a member state, as farming milieux and associations, I'm looking at Viktor Szmulewicz because he's very much interested in that. We still can continue this debate. We can exert influence on the shape of these regulations. Some things have already been regulated, like last November, the Commission adopted a package of regulations which introduce or facilitate registration of biological plant protection preparations and allowing microorganisms there. So on the one hand, we see threats. On the other hand, we can see some opportunities connected with the fact that we can use biological solutions in plant cultivation. If I understand you correctly, can I paraphrase it? Be calm, there is still time, there is an ongoing discussion. Do you see it in the same way? Yes, I would say so. Yes, that's a good summary. There is still time. Recently, a group of EU member states approached the Commission and asked for a specific assessment of drafted regulations, like economic assessment, how it will influence the food market, agriculture, food prices. Because we have to bear in mind that we have a different situation now as compared to the moment when the European Commission started to work on the strategy from farm to table. There is a war, there are soaring prices of production means of food, and we have to find our way. We have to navigate through this situation somehow. Then we need time. Okay, I guess we'll be coming back to the international situation, but now let me give the mic to other speakers. Do we still have time? Well, from the perspective of a producer of biopreparations, I'd like to say that biopreparations are not only biological plant protection measures, but there are also they are also allowed, namely microbiological fertilizing products, including biostimulants, and we have a regulation from the EU 1009 since last July, and in line with that regulation, there is a group of microorganisms which may be part of biostimulants, and on this basis we can register these preparations. But if we are thinking about the law catching up with the changes or the needs, no, it is like delayed, because in the regulation there are 4 kinds of microorganisms, and actually we as producers specializing in biopreparations for 33 years, we know that the group of microorganisms which shows stimulating activity is much larger. We are talking about thousands or perhaps hundreds of various bacteria and fungi. And here, Azotobacter, so Rhizobium bacteria group. So that's a very narrow view and a very narrow group. So we as the producer are quite limited here. Then, yes, there is a regulation, but throughout Europe, we had only 3 certifying units. It was a big difficulty for us because we have regulations, but still we cannot obtain a certificate for a preparation because there are only 3 units which are able to do that. So there is no accredited lab specializing in testing microorganisms from the perspective of biostimulants. So biocertification was made quite difficult. So as you are saying, the law is not really catching up with development of the technology. So we are not that optimistic or not fully optimistic, if I may. What you are saying now brings together, it is about the approach to biological preparations or biological plant protection solutions. But it also shows how decision makers view that. These are 2 topics mentioned here, because there is a regulation. On the one hand, it was announced as the one introducing far-reaching changes. It was supposed to improve a possibility to register biological preparations. But it is not really there yet. It is not like that yet. It was to bring more order into the situation. It was about collecting data, requirements for the data for these preparations. It is not fully translated, at least not in the near future, into the reality. Then, what the minister was saying, there is the whole debate about the Green Deal strategy for the European Union, because on the one hand, the European Union wants to have this green transformation. And when we are talking about the assumptions, I think we'll all agree that it is the right direction. But on the other hand, there is this unrealistic approach on the entire situation. It is so complex socially, environmentally, practically. It is very complex because on the one hand, we are expecting the reduction. We know that from various analyses on the European level, and this reduction will have very serious negative consequences for agricultural production in Poland, among other things. But on the other hand, there are expectations that the markets will be saturated with biological preparations, fertilizers, replacing or pushing out the chemical solutions. It won't happen like that. Why not? It is quite simple. There are no available alternatives that would replace fully some active substances. It is a process which requires a lot of time. I guess you can confirm my words, because these issues require a very lengthy, complex process of tests and registration. So it is not true that in a short time framework the market will turn upside down and the whole conventional plant protection will disappear and it will be replaced by biological solutions. We have to say it very plainly. So in this context, the discussion about the Green Deal is very much advised. Tomasz was nodding all the time. Yes, well, because I agree with so many things here, especially when the Green Deal was announced. There was just an outline of what we are going to do as the European Union, but there were no details there. And there was a bit of a scare, and, well, people are simply scared because now we are cutting down on active substances. The Netherlands, 10 kilos per hectare, and for Poland it is 2 kilos per hectare. It won't be like by 50% for every country. No, there are different characteristics for every country. In the Netherlands, there are more greenhouses. There are 10,000 hectares of greenhouses, and then plant protection are used more intensely. So there will be special coefficient for every country, depending on specification of production, on the features of plant production in a given country. So it is all happening, it is being prepared. So we shouldn't be very much afraid of that. We shouldn't be very much afraid of the final state of the situations, because there are no final decisions. They were not made yet. What is very significant is that the law is not catching up. It is delayed because registration of a plant protection preparations, because we are talking about replacement of chemical solutions. Replace with what? Biological preparations. And now what is happening? Registration of a plant protection solution is a cost of several million euro. These are tons of paper, of documents, several thousand of A4 printed pieces of paper, documents, tons of documents. And we have to be aware that biological preparations that we want to register and we want to take the full path have many requirements, and there are many changes that have been introduced, but these changes are not sufficient yet. And as the entire Europe, the European Commission basically should change its attitude a bit and should change some regulations, shortening this registration path. Because now we are removing very good chemical plant preparations, and we can replace them with the biological preparations. We can do that, but the registration process is 6 up to 10 years. 6 is the minimum period. So we have time, but not enough time, because we cannot catch up with biological preparations. All right, if I may comment on that. That's a very important thing that you have said about the registration process. Huge costs, and it is simply lengthy. Time for registration is the time Well, during this period needed for registration, it simply means that it is such a long period of time that biological preparation is innovative at the beginning of the process and is no longer innovative towards the end of this process. It will lose its innovative edge. And since we are talking about costs of the registration, I, as a producer, know that in order to have efficient microbiological preparation, it has to have a complex compound, many strains of bacteria cooperating with each other, and registration of every strain as an active substance. Again, you can add it up. Costs of registration are multiplied. In many cases, the registration makes no sense or it is impossible, if I may. For conventional plant protection preparations, it is the same situation, actually. So I just wanted to say that in the context of certain ideas, because most of the time in the public space, there are like utterances or statements from decision makers, mostly Brussels decision makers, and they don't understand certain important mechanisms like time, costs, any other factors. We've been talking about that for many years, but somehow they are not very receptive. For biological and chemical plant preparations, it is the same situation and expectation that you will have a certain number of substances or preparations which appear in the market out of the blue. It is unrealistic. We have to say it very honestly, and so we have to be aware of that. Minister, what can be done to improve the situation? Perhaps one more thing needs to be said, because this process of registration may look differently depending on different groups of the products. As for plant protection preparations, it is very complex. It requires very specific tests. As for preparations which are fertilizers or preparations improving plant cultivation, and then the process is much simpler. There is also a group of microorganisms. For example, a ladybug or a specific kind of wasp, like samurai wasp, as it is called. And there are technologies of sterilization of some insects, which can be used in plant protection. So it is outside of the registration system. So we need to look through the perspective of various groups of products. And now, can we facilitate this process? Can we accelerate it? Can we drop it, perhaps? Can we drop some registration requirements? In 2021, the Portuguese presidency, with our strong support, postulated creation of a separate simplified path for plant protection preparations, the biological ones. It was partially successful because the package which was adopted in the autumn introduced some simplifications, but, well, it was not fully simplified. What was the reason for that? There was the pandemic. Microbiological preparations are also viruses. And when the public opinion in Europe learned that we are going to use viruses for plant protection, or organizations which are not close to agriculture, but they are very active, very loud. They started to shout, "Oh, listen, farmers want to fill you with viruses, and they want to feed you with viruses." You may imagine the reaction from the general public. The commissioner yesterday said that in Europe we have several million farmers or people connected with farming, and 400 million of people who see food only on shelves in shops. And it is also a problem of assessment of certain phenomena which are very important for us, for farmers, for agriculture. They are very important. And how these phenomena are viewed by the general public, which is far away from agriculture, because they may not understand certain issues. There is a lot of room for maneuver for administration and for various organizations for agricultural associations and so on and so forth, to build awareness and to try and explain certain things, not only in the farming media, but also we want to reach the wider public opinion. And here you have mentioned an issue of a process of registration, the waiting time. Minister, if you could comment on that, if you are sitting together on the stage and you can have this discussion very directly. Okay, I'm a proponent of simplifications, but not at the expense of security. So undoubtedly, safety first. We have to say that plant protection preparations, which are well tested, registered, which are legally sold in Poland, well, our inspection monitors the traces of plant preparations, of plant protection preparations in agricultural produce, and surpluses or excessive amount is, again, it's still at a very low level. If it exceeds a certain threshold, it is by 2–3%. And if we think about cases which might be dangerous for human health, in the whole territory of Poland, it may happen like several times a year. So if plant protection preparations are applied in the right way, they are not a threat. But in order to avoid the threat, scientists have to test everything, have to check everything before the Minister of Agriculture will issue a permit. Well, luckily, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. We need to feel safe. Of course, I agree with the Minister and all your statements. I'm not trying to undermine that. It is very good that this process is there. It is good that it is taking so much of the time, because then we can be certain that all the elements that need to be tested before the preparation enters the market will be tested, and before the preparation will be used in a safe way. So that's a good thing, actually, because we don't want to have any doubts and concerns. At the end of the day, we have people questioning that, but we need to emphasize that it is absolutely indispensable for all of us as consumers feel safe, because everyone here is a consumer. So we need to have the sense that if we eat food, this food is simply safe. If I may comment on that, to what Minister has said, there was a very important statement. You said you are a proponent of combined solutions. As biopreparation producer, we are not sticking to our guns that biology can fully replace chemistry, so to say, or chemical preparations, and that farming will be as efficient as it was. No, not really. So withdrawing various substances, active substances, plant protection substances, it is all preparing farming and agriculture to the European Green Deal. And for years, we've been observing benefits of using both chemical and biological preparations. So we are not saying that biological preparations may fully replace chemical preparations. It may be supportive, it may be auxiliary. We are not saying that we advise application of biological preparations by means of intervention. It is about prevention. And I have customers who are farmers, and they have reduced application of chemical preparations, and they apply biological preparations. And thanks to that, as you are saying, the contents of all these traces or chemical traces in the agricultural produce is much lower, because bacteria are active and they decompose all these traces. Yes, and here I'd like to say that there are discussions in the European Commission about integrated production methods. I'm a proponent of them as well. So integrated production methods and integrated protection methods as well. There are assumptions that every country will be able to create methodology. It won't be like universal methodology for the entire European Union. Now a question arises whether Well, a question about these methodologies. Approach to protection is changing. So what is our goal? Do we want to have production without traces? Do we want to reduce chemical preparations? Or do we want to protect the environment? Obviously, three goals are important, all the three goals. But sometimes we need to compromise. Sometimes we need to prioritize, because integrated methodology of plant protection, we start with biological preparations. But in order to produce that without traces, we apply chemical solutions at the beginning, and then we move towards the biological ones. So I guess it requires a certain debate at a national level. We need to analyze these methodologies, and well, very often when we start to apply typically biological methodology since the very beginning, well, then we can see that weather is not permitting the very difficult climate conditions, and chemical solutions need to enter the scene anyway. So experts need to be involved in the discussion from various institutions, from various companies. But let me ask a question to the minister. Are you thinking about that, a debate like that? Yes, yes, absolutely. When we work on methodologies of integrated production, we cooperate very closely with agricultural institutes, with the Horticulture Institute or Plant Protection Institute, but other institutions as well. So scientists are thinking about these issues, are thinking how to combine various methods of plant protection, of fertilizing, so that they are the most efficient with minimum threats. So, yes, there is a debate like that. It is an ongoing discussion now. And let me just say that we have prepared plenty of methodologies that have already been adopted. And since the next year they will be used in practice, it is connected with the fact that the National Strategic Plan provides for support for integrated production. So we needed to modify that from this perspective. Let me also highlight one more thing, that integrated production is a system which is quite flexible. It is based on a rational approach. Let us apply as little synthetic preparations as possible, but if there is no other way, and we can see that a different method will not be as efficient, then we have to make a decision and we might apply them as well. So I can see it as a big value, even though in practice you have to learn about the system. You have to learn how to do that. It requires a bit more knowledge than simple application of some plant protection program, which was introduced many years ago by a company for the preparation. You were talking about two important issues, or two important groups, farmers, producers, and consumers. And I have another question. Perhaps the answer will be lengthy and complex, but let us give it a try. So what is the end goal? Is it protecting the climate, protecting the planet? Yes, obviously we want that, but the majority of us are not afraid of doomsday. We are afraid of the end of this day, the end of this week, and whether we can eat food which is good for us, whether we can pay for it, whether we can afford it. So how this change will influence the changes, it is the perspective of a consumer, and how it will influence Polish farmers and their competitiveness and efficiency of production.
Let me be the one to start to answer that first. Before the fertilizer crisis and before the war situation, these preparations were more expensive than conventional preparations. But with the pandemic and the war and the fertilizer crisis reversed the situation. Now, these solutions are often less expensive than conventional solutions. So actually, they don't necessarily will translate into higher production costs and higher food costs. So the protection itself may not be more expensive, but bear in mind the yield. So if, in case of specialized crops, like decorative flowers or plants, and some type of specific plants or crops, well, that is debatable. Very often, such protection may be more effective, more efficient. So with microorganisms, the protection efficacy is much higher than in case of other preparations. So I personally do not see any threat in here. I think that high efficiency, high production yield is achievable, but here large hectarage crops, well, they are the reason for concern, like rape, like wheat, etc. Obviously, we have a number of solutions like combating pathogens in soil and other solutions and other actions. So I often talk to environmentalists and I tell them you need to buy a better sprayer. Well, because you need to apply certain preparations more intensively. As for large hectarage crops, most our clients are among those who keep such, grow such crops. I've said that we've been doing that for more than 20, 30 years, and we've been running many tests. We've been analyzing return on such production, and on the basis of the performance, I can say that the return on investment, return on the production remains as it was, and then we keep the level of profit. So when it comes to the yield, we do not see any decreases. Well, one thing is to apply it, but another thing is to learn how to apply these biological preparations. If there is a will, if there is a method-based approach, then this production yield, production efficiency will be achieved.
Pytanie było o konkurencyjność, więc
You ask about
trzeba zwrócić
competition.
uwagę na jeden aspekt, to znaczy konkurencyjność to jest szereg czynników,
Competition
które ostatecznie wpływają na
entails
to, czy
many
produkcja jest konkurencyjna,
aspects
czy
or many
na przykład
factors.
nasi rolnicy są konkurencyjni względem
So the
swoich,
question would be
kolegów z
about
innych krajów, czy
our
też spoza Unii
farmers being
Europejskiej.
competitive
I tutaj, nie negując tego, co
when
państwo
compared
mówią,
to
żeby była jasność,
their
bo
counterparts
wchodzić w tą
in
dyskusję,
Eastern European
chciałbym
countries, in the
spojrzeć
EU,
na to w takim
etc.
szerszym kontekście, bo ta dyskusja może być za chwilę
Let me look at
bezprzedmiotowa
things
z tego
at a,
względu, że
in a
jeżeli
broader
doprowadzimy
context.
do właśnie te wszystkie pomysły dosyć, nazwijmy to delikatnie, kontrowersyjne
We have all these
strony Komisji Europejskiej,
controversial, so to say, ideas put forward by the European Commission. And then if we put them together with the analyses prepared by independent centers, we can see the strong dependence on the imports when it comes to food. We can see expected drop in the income of farmers. So here this competition may not be as important as it seems right now. Farmers will be facing other difficulties that would distort this concept of competition. So as we're talking, well, I think we need to focus on preventing the European agricultural sector from suffering heavy damages.
ostatecznie także na nas, na firmach i dlatego myślę, że warto o tym wspomnieć. Ze swojego miejsca polecam analizę przygotowaną
So
przez
I
Polityka Insight,
strongly
gdzie jest
recommend
dokładnie
an analysis
program
prepared
naczyń.
by
Pierwsze to jest
Polityka
analiza przygotowana przez
Insight
3 ośrodki naukowe w Polsce.
review and
Bardzo znaczące
reporting
pana profesora
publication.
Poczty, która pokazuje wpływ
So this report, this publication, this study presents the anticipated impact of the global situation, on the situation in Poland. There is a long list of pros and cons, or advantages or disadvantages, and I think it's worth studying.
I teraz powie nam, jak sobie z tym wszystkim poradzić.
Okay, sir, Minister. Well, I strongly advise to read that study and analyze it. Well, one thing is that in Poland, in Europe, we do not follow one single model of a farm. We do not have one single model of farming. We have small farms growing traditional crops. We have orchards. We have vegetable and fruit growing. Then we have large farms and large crop growing farms. So when drafting legislation at the EU level, I believe that we should guarantee this differentiation among member states. Also in Poland, when we look at the northern part of Poland, we can see large farms which are different in terms, vary in terms of their business profile, commercial profile, growing profile. Now about food prices and supply of food products to the consumer. We cannot approach the farming sector as one universal, homogeneous unit. Bear in mind that for years we used to have exceptionally inexpensive food products in the EU, and that has changed because of the war. That has changed because of concerns about availability of food. So we need to look at fertilization and pesticides, etc. So we need to use that to secure accessible, sufficient food supply at reasonable prices. We must bear that in mind, that our societies will suffer, not only farmers, but our citizens as well, all our citizens as well. As for food availability, you're right, Minister. Food in Europe was very inexpensive when compared to salaries. Well, at this point in time, people spend between 18 to 22% of their budget on food. So these were studies carried out before the war. Food is not expensive, but note that there is a certain difference between the money that farmers receive, are paid for their products, and what is then on shelves. So there are losses, there are issues when it comes to chain of supplies. So if you claim that food prices are low, if you say to consumers right now, I think you would have a problem here. Farmers do not sell their products in open air market, not really.
Z rolnictwem, z wojną, z inflacją sprawiła, że chyba pierwszy raz od wielu lat konsumenci w ogóle zaczynają dostrzegać
it seems that for the first time in years, consumers begin to notice the importance of the agricultural sector, the importance of supporting that sector, and that this is an important branch of our economy. Now we're moving on to the concept of eco schemes. Do you think that what we have in strategic plan, or that we're going to have in the strategic plan right now, is going to be sufficient? To be honest, I'm not a farmer. I can see some farmers sitting here in the audience. I don't think they're entirely satisfied with that concept, but that's the issue of certain practice. And I think that the practitioners should have a say here. But when we speak about biological crop growing, there is one concept of crop growing, and there are some financial incentives planned there. Incentives to be paid out for applying biological preparations here in Poland. But the experts claim right here at this forum that this is not a sufficient amount. The amount of the incentive is not sufficient to prompt farmers to follow that concept. All is also dependent on the acreage. Well, so it may be as well that the legislator had good intentions, but the outcome and the effects are what they are. So biological protection of plants is one of the concepts here. So perhaps that concept should be changed in a way to translate into some incentives for farmers. I understand that these concepts are going to be revised.
Tak, ekoschemat dotyczący biologicznej ochrony roślin.
So eco-concept regarding biological plant protection.
Produktów nawozowych, czyli innych biopreparatów.
So there is this need for other e-preparations. We've been selling these biopreparations for hundreds of thousands of hectares in Poland. There are many farmers who've been using these preparations, who are happy with them, and they see the positive outcome of applying these preparations, and they want to continue using them. And they've been somehow not taken into account in here because, or disregarded in here because of precisely of the fact that they've been using this preparation. So yesterday, Minister Kowalczyk mentioned that at the main debate. You've also mentioned that these eco schemes will be refined. So the farmers who've introduced these biological preparations are subsidized too. Do you see any gaps in the system? Well, the Ministry of Agriculture has been debating on the concept of supporting the agricultural sector for years. And obviously, it seems that the funding targeted at these goals and targets are not as they used to be. When it comes to biological fertilization products, under the scheme of integrated eco-production, they can be used with subsidizing, with co-financing here. It is only at this point in time that farmers are applying for subsidies or for financial support here. So it's difficult to say whether that support or that aid is sufficient and the acreage. I hope that this support is quite intensive. So far, we've had about 3,000 farmers participating in the system at the national level. At this point in time, farmers keep on calling our inspectorate about support for rye protection, support for rye production and preparation. So far, we haven't been engaged in that, but we're planning to have that form of support ready for the future. So we can see this huge interest on the part of farmers. Well, I have my own farm, but I do not have the time to go deeply into eco concepts because I just don't have the time for that. Ladies and gentlemen, we still have some minutes before the end of the panel. If you have questions, ladies and gentlemen, from the floor, do ask them right now. Please ask questions. Do not offer statements, but questions. Thank you. Just let us wait for the mic.
Dziękujemy panu.
Dzień dobry, jestem rolnikiem, prowadzę hodowlę bydła mięsnego. Chciałem was wszystkich zapytać ogólnie, jak mamy produkować, żeby przetrwać.
I'm a farmer,
Bo kolejne pomyłki Unii Europejskiej czy naszego polskiego rządu nie pozwolą, żeby jakiekolwiek rolnictwo tutaj było.
My question is, what can we do to survive? Because the effort of the government is aimed as wiping us out of the surface. We do not have the support to survive. Because of the efforts of the EU and the Polish government. Well, Minister, how can I answer that statement? Every authority makes mistake. I am not an expert in meat cattle, in beef keeping.
Ja rozumiem, że rolnictwo znalazło się w niezwykle trudnej sytuacji. Każda branża.
I understand that the farming sector is in a very bad condition, it's in a very difficult condition.
Są organizacje rolnicze, są izby rolnicze,
but then there are
organizacje producentów,
farmers' chambers, and there is this organization of cattle breeders, and they work hand in hand with the ministry. I'm convinced that there is the situation like this government or this authorities not being interested in listening to the people. Well, it doesn't happen. I don't think it's possible. The funds that we have from the EU budget, which are comparable and higher than the funds that have been available so far. We do our best to distribute them equally and fairly. Ladies and gentlemen, we have experts on the panel. Thank you. I have this question. I represent unions. I have colleagues who have questions about rape growing and sugar beet growing. What about spraying? What about fertilization? Is that profitable? Is that yield-generating approach? Well, I also have beekeepers' union, and my colleagues say, let's stop spraying rape fully. And I'm asking about certain pests. Would the rape survive? Would their bees survive without pesticides here? Without spraying with pesticides? Well, at this point in time, let us think about the measures that we take. We spray with the plants with pesticides sometimes. Is it good for farmers? Is it good for consumers? We promote biological solutions, and we also promote a healthy approach to the production. Being aware of what is happening around the European Commission, I can only say that the people who decide about certain steps, they are not practitioners. They listen to the public opinion. They listen to consumers. It is so easy to manipulate through the mass media. When the consumer hears that certain pesticides can be harmful to bees, that becomes common knowledge that spreads like a virus, and that is too far-fetching. I am afraid that this trend, this concept, cannot be reversed. I understand what you're saying. I'm a practitioner. I'm a farmer. And I do agree with what you're saying. That was a political error that all happened 15 years ago. That's how it started. Some scientists, groups of farmers were claiming that actually application of pesticides, targeted application, was more effective because of fewer substances introduced to the environment. I cannot say anymore, but I can only say that so many people in the EU are aware that that was a mistake. So we can hear repeatedly about people, about decision makers who do not have the understanding of the role of farming and of the importance of professional knowledge in that. The decision which caused withdrawal of certain substances that were targeted in application, so they were safe, very safe in their application, resulted in a fourfold growth of pesticide spraying of rape. So actually the outcome was opposite to the intended outcome, because they increased the cost and basically had an impact on the environmental protection. Then, well, when we speak about CO2 emission and climate changes, well, this decision was a paradox. The Institute for Plant Protection in Poznań prepared a study, and the study showed that the prohibited applications actually had not had any adverse impact on bees. So the core of what I'm trying to say is that the decision makers are in Brussels, and it would have been so much better if they used professionals, if they used practitioners in their decision makers. Decisions should not be made on the basis of the public opinion. And it's again about consumer awareness.
I fully agree with previous speakers, and what we've been saying since the beginning of the debate. What is important is being reasonable and maintaining balance in everything. As for bees, of course, I agree with my colleagues. My husband is a beekeeper, has many beehives, and I don't see this adverse effect. Let me remind you that for many years, ministers of agriculture make decisions under derogation about accepting these solutions to be applied, to add them to seeds of rape, of beetroot. It was a very good solution because they took into account local conditions in Poland. Some other member states also used this mechanism. Unfortunately, the EU law excluded this possibility. We cannot use it any longer. But if we use plant protection preparations also during blooming of rape, we are limiting the risk for bees. Obviously, bee protection is a priority. It is understandable for everyone. It is clear for everyone. Farmers also understand that because they are very often beekeepers. They understand that if there is no pollination, well, there will be the end of it all, actually. So, very much appreciated. We very much understand that if we apply plant protection preparations in a safe way, there is no risk. But we need to talk to our colleagues in Brussels, because we are talking about this regulation about sustainable application of plant protection preparations, and the situation is as follows. There are social consultations. Several thousand of ecological organizations send their opinions. Some of them say we need a full ban on chemical plant protection preparations, and there are many opinions like that. Farming organizations, agricultural organizations cannot join forces to strike a certain balance, to counteract or counterbalance these extreme opinions on the other side. It is not about real ecology. It is not about a real environmental protection. It is about being too extreme, actually, there. Two more questions. We have 5 minutes left. Marek Krzysztoforski, Center of Consulting, Ecologization, like introduction of biopreparations. Well, you can see the situation in the market. It is happening. There are plenty of preparations, fertilizing preparations with like intermediate effect. And we know what will happen. There will be a whole heap of preparations which will not be very efficient. Apart from very expensive, well-tested preparations, there will be also the ones based on marketing only. Is there a possibility to have a certain system of assessment of these preparations, of pointing out which of them are not good preparations per se or tested preparations per se? I remember leaf-applied preparations. For example, farmers approached me and they say, oh, there is a great preparation against some insects. And they were saying, no, that's not entirely true. When I heard the name of the preparation, it was not effective. And they say, no, but there was a gentleman telling us it is very effective. Well, so sometimes there is a lot of marketing. So which scientific milieu, which organizations can say simply or can assess which preparations are well tested? I'm not talking about certification. I'm talking about certain assessment system. All right. So a farmer should require tests and should require test results. Also, they should ask for proof that it was tested, it is efficient. You are absolutely right that in this situation, there are so many companies like that, and preparations based on marketing. So an average person, an average customer may find it very difficult to verify which preparation is efficient. If there is a lot of marketing, if there is a lot of advantages being highlighted and so on and so forth, it is very difficult to be reasonable about that. We have to demand proof. We have to demand tests, test results. If the producer is a serious person, serious company, they will present many years of test results, not like one season, but opinions from customers for many years, satisfied customers who applied this preparation in their field and who can really corroborate the story that it is really efficient. Well, I will not fully agree, I guess, because paper is very patient. So you may print out a leaflet. There are so many tests that we have had for the last 3-4 years. Well, it is easy. So we are thinking about simplification of the path of registration. There are external units testing that, someone is coordinating that, someone is monitoring that, but the path for registration must be there. But it must be simplified, it must be shortened. 2-3 years, let's say. Tests are also necessary. We need 10, 15, 20 tests in a given country by external certified accredited labs. Then some assessments like ecotoxicology or behavior of active substance in the environment. There are different kinds of tests there. For biological preparations, these tests may be simplified, or you may extrapolate, and then you may register a plant preparation, because I fully agree with you that the company in which I consult has the same problem. Farmers are displeased or disappointed. They tested this solution, it was wrong, it was inefficient. Yes, because there is standardization in plant protection preparations. It means that if a producer of every preparation is responsible for quality and quantity of compounds, of elements, of ingredients, there cannot be any contamination. If there is like a fungi and like spores in 1 gram, well, so there are certain levels and certain thresholds and so on and so forth. You have to meet these requirements, otherwise you will be punished as the producer. But if you sell fertilizers, there are no limitations like that. So registration, yes, but a simplified procedure. So that's my point. I will not agree. No, not really. Biopreparations are not only about plant protection preparations, and not all preparations have to go through this path, which is a very complex process. As the minister was saying, for us, the biological preparations, it is simplified. But we as producers with 30 years of experience, with respect for our own business, with respect for our customers, for farmers, we also have tests by various scientific institutes, research units, scientific units, academic units. If we declare that in our preparation there is concentration like 10 to the 9th of some ingredient, we maintain this concentration, and a customer may take the preparation to the lab, have it tested, and they will see the result confirmed. So it is our goal to maintain this high quality, so that preparation is not applied once by a farmer who will buy it once but will never go back. Our customers are customers for many years, satisfied with our preparations, and we take care of their high quality so that they come back to us again. Thank you very much indeed. I guess that's the end of our debate. It was 1 hour of a discussion. I guess it was more invigorating than a cup of coffee. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your participation. And many thanks to our panelists. It was Ewa Kaniowicz from Biogen. It was Minister Andrzej Chodkowski, Chief Inspector for Plant Protection and Seed Production, Marcin Mucha, Director of the Polish Association of Plant Protection, and Tomasz Domański, Key Account Manager, Agri, International Producer of Biocontrol Association. I'm sure if you have more questions, more doubts, you can approach our panelists informally. I guess they are staying with us for some time at the forum, so you can talk to them informally in the hall. Thank you very much indeed, and have a nice day. I'd like to invite you to participate in this panel. We are going to talk about challenges and prospects for development of the Polish agri-food industry. So the rules of the game are as follows. In a moment, I will introduce eminent experts, and I will ask to join me on stage, and we are going to have a discussion, and we'll try to come up with certain solutions, even though 1 hour for experts, I don't know about that, not that much. But I'd like you to actively participate. It is not only about passive listening. If you have any questions, if you have any doubts, if you have a need to participate in our discussion, of course, please do that by all means. I'm thinking about yesterday. Don't throw objects at us. Don't throw food at us. I hope it won't happen. I hope it was a one-time event yesterday. You can throw an idea at me, or you can throw a question at me. Then we'll try to handle it together with the experts. Obviously, it will be up to the experts, first and foremost. So let me invite Mariusz Dziwulski and Dariusz Goszczyński, President of the National Poultry Chamber, and then Andrzej Gantner, Vice President, General Director of the Polish Federation of Food Manufacturers Employees Association, Marek Felbur, Advisor to the Management Board of Polmlek Group of Financial Operations and Bank Negotiations, and Mariusz Dziwulski, Analysis Expert and Industry Knowledge Manager for the Agri-Food Markets at PKO Bank Polski. Good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, one more thing. As for housekeeping rules, perhaps, because, well, I'm afraid I may forget to say it later. So, there is a report, the food market in Poland in 2022. The report is available here at the Congress, and there is also a report, and I guess it will be discussed during our panel, especially by a representative of PKO BP. It is PKO BP's reports in a digital format. We are going to go back to that, but it is a report. Smart agriculture and its challenges. That's the title of the report. Excellent. So it will be mentioned during our discussion. So there is a bonus for you. You can read it after the panel, but definitely we are going to touch upon certain issues included in these reports. On the second day of the Congress, perhaps we should talk less about challenges. I'm sure you've heard a lot about challenges so far, but we'll try to look for some perspectives for development. So how to handle the challenges and how are we handling. So perhaps Dariusz Goszczyński should be the first speaker now, because he signed an appeal to Prime Minister on the 17th of March. It was not to Deputy Prime Minister Kowalczyk, it was to Prime Minister Morawiecki, and it says that the government should be very fast in undertaking some activities, because Polish agri-food sector, a very important part of the Polish economy, is facing a lot of troubles. On the other hand, in the reports, as the ones I've mentioned, there is information that everything is great. Export of Polish food is going up in quantity and in the amount of money, so it is all going great. So if it is so good, why is it so bad? Why are you appealing to the Prime Minister to take action? If you read the report more closely, the picture is not that rosy, because in the report, the authors, who are also here in the room, the authors of the report are here, mention challenges as well. And this particular report, with the letter to the head of the Polish government, to Prime Minister, it is like congruent, because we mention challenges connected with the poultry sector, because that's the sector I represent. And numbers for 2022 may seem quite optimistic, but there are plenty of challenges which we need to mention in our conversation with Prime Minister, because we point to threats, and there are numerous threats at the moment. Let me begin by saying that, well, that is like liberating prices and contingencies. Yes, I know that yesterday we were talking about grains from Ukraine, but there is also poultry from Ukraine. Import of poultry meat from Ukraine disturbed the European market. That's another thing. So you can see it is a very important problem, not only for Poland. Our Polish, Dutch, Spanish colleagues are mentioning the same thing. The Commissioner Wojciechowski already emphasized that like grains is a problem, especially to like adjacent countries next to Ukrainian border. Then influx of poultry meat from Ukraine in big numbers is a problem for the entire European Union. Let me make it clear. I'm not saying, well, we are talking about one Ukrainian unit registered in Cyprus. It has a perfect situation now. If it is in Cyprus, it is a European entity. That's not the point, actually, because they are trying to avoid paying taxes. As a matter of fact, paying taxes in Ukraine, they are trying to avoid that. But the perfect situation for them is that they don't need to meet requirements from the EU, but they have unlimited access to the EU market, and they use it fully. 160,000 tons of poultry meat were entered into the EU market. If you look at January, February 2023, it is 100% increase in the numbers. It is a disturbance, huge disturbance of the EU market. That is just one of many problems. We are the biggest producer of poultry meat in Poland. We use Horeca channel, and this Ukrainian entity is active precisely in the same channel. So Polish producers suffer greatly due to that. And we are not complaining only. We also try to point to specific solutions. Yeah, we'll talk about solutions in a second, if I may, because in the letter that we are referring to, well, I have a question mark, because I'm thinking about one of the solutions. Okay, so over to Mariusz Dziwulski, there are two reports, and you are saying that there are two reports, and there is PKO BP report, the bank's report. Does it also say that the situation is quite good, but there are some clouds gathering on the horizon? Or how would you phrase it? We don't want to talk about challenges, but they are looming on the horizon somehow. So the war, post-COVID area, energy prices, inflation, and so on and so forth. And I'm thinking about it in the following way. Do we see any opportunities there, or just threats for the Polish agri-food sector? As for the report, it is about the agri-food sector, smart agriculture solutions, and some challenges. And there are challenges ahead of the agri-food sector. Maybe it pertains mostly to farmers, but also food companies. So the Green Deal in agriculture and the strategy accompanying that, so from field to table or biodiversity by 2030, impose certain limitations, or they are certain directions, or they set certain directions. So farmers and agri-food sector are expected to attain certain goals. You are talking about imposing. It is suggesting a certain oppression, but what about opportunities? Are they there? If I was to focus on the conclusions from the report, we were trying to compare Polish agriculture with the EU agriculture. What does it look like in terms of sustainability? And there are plenty of challenges. And there is a very difficult road ahead of us and ahead of Polish food producers and Polish farmers. But there are many areas where Polish agriculture actually fits in this concept of sustainability. And I think in these areas, we can deal with these issues so much better than Western European countries. Let me just mention emission rate, methane emission rate for Polish agriculture. Well, we are a big food producer, so absolute numbers are quite solid. But if we calculate methane emission per 1 hectare of arable land, it turns out we are below EU average, and very much below average for the Netherlands, Belgium, So I wouldn't, well, it might be an opportunity partially, but I mean it is like a ray of optimism, a little bit of optimism there. And so it is optimism related to the Green Deal concept and sustainability. All right then, good, because I don't want us to repeat a mantra that there are only threats everywhere, it can't get better, it can't be good, because we listen such messages all the time. So we need to look for positive topics as well and positive signs perhaps. For example, in EU programs or EU strategies. Andrzej Gantner. What's your take on challenges facing agri-food markets? I remember that quite recently we had an interview for the Interia.pl, and we are talking about lack of assistance from the state connected or lack of assistance from the state, due to which agri-food sector has bigger problems than other sectors, with, like, for example, handling energy prices or soaring energy prices. Would you say that whatever doesn't kill us will make us stronger, or no? Maybe without the state we cannot face these problems, we cannot solve these problems. But if you have too close connections and too close relations with officials, with institutions, maybe it is not good for the economy. Well, the agri-food sector in Poland and EU is so closely linked to politicians, it cannot be any closer. It's all up to goodwill of politicians, be it on a domestic level or an EU level. The problem is that decisions are made on both levels, and very often they miss one thing. There is no assessment of the impact of regulations. So like they are taken blindly without looking further into the consequences of the decisions. Because if we say EU agriculture, it doesn't mean a thing. Because Polish agriculture, Dutch agriculture, French, Romanian, Hungarian agriculture are different entities. They have so many differences, different conditions, different features, different approaches, different structures, and everything, at the end of the day, everything is translated into profitability, whether it is profitable, what is not profitable. So many things are designed at the EU level, and they say, oh, generally speaking, it should be great, but no one looks more closely what will happen to individual countries, what will happen to individual national agricultures, so to say. Are we saying the bad EU imposes so many bad things? I'm not saying bad EU, because we are all part of the EU, and our food sector, our food industry benefited from entering the single EU market, because 83% of export goes to EU. But a question arises, because we are supposed to talk about challenges, and the biggest challenge for me is that we are talking about strategies which will be transformed into specific legal acts, regulations, EU regulations, which will be in place, and we will be obliged to do certain things like waste management regulations and so many draft regulations, and we have no idea what will happen after it is implemented. Sometimes we can see huge fines on the side of producers in like waste management or package-related regulations. Did anyone analyze the impact of these regulations? Let me be the devil's advocate. All right, let me just finish my idea. So, writing to the Prime Minister, in my view, makes no sense. I know you haven't signed the letter. I haven't signed the letter. I do apologize, but I don't want to waste paper. I don't want to waste my time, because Prime Minister is not responsible for that. And it is a complex matter, and no Prime Minister can repair that. No Prime Minister can change that, because food policy is built throughout decades. It is not a matter of weeks or months, and every minister, every Prime Minister, which has a certain idea, all right, let me have a act or regulation here or there. No, it is a mistake. Usually basically they damage many things and don't repair anything. Aren't you making a mistake now? Because you are saying it makes no sense to talk about it to Prime Minister because it is too complex for Prime Minister, to put it mildly. But all the EU regulations are not created by algorithms. They are created by politicians, including Polish Prime Minister, or at least they should be. So perhaps it makes sense to write to this particular person. No, not really, that they are not created by artificial intelligence. Sometimes I doubt that there is any intelligence behind them when I looked at the consequences of these regulations. Because if they want to make Europe into a place in which we are going to produce a hugely expensive food that for many consumers will be not affordable in terms of prices, but will bring so much cheap food from the countries that won't have to introduce all these regulations, well, we have a sample of that right now. That's what's happening. There are so many internal EU regulations, and huge internal regulations equals costs, many regulations, and overnight, someone opens the borders and introduces many kinds of products which are 30% cheaper than ours. That's nothing. That's still nothing. They are cheaper, and they don't have to observe any regulations, any requirements. Either it is equality, so equal playing field for competition, or we have so many requirements for our farmers, like trillions and billions of regulations. Not all of them make sense. And thanks to that, you are organic. You will aim at zero emission. And then they say, yes, we are going to do that, but don't stab us in the back. Why do you let other farmers who don't have to observe anything at all? That's why I'm saying I don't need to write any letters to Prime Minister. I need to shout about that. Also in Brussels, so speak very loudly about that, but Brussels is the European Council, composed of governments, that's correct, and you need to go to ministries, not Prime Minister, for goodness sake. Prime Minister is doing other things, so ministers, not only the Minister of Agriculture, and explain to them what is wrong with regulations or draft regulations, and ask them to present our position. I don't want to criticize only. I was at the Ministry of Environment, and there was a great presentation during a debate on packaging, and two our postulates were presented, that it is over-regulation, it will be hugely expensive, and that there will be negative consequences for the Polish food sector. So yes, it can be done, but it is not about letters to Prime Minister. Thank you.
So what we have now on the table is as follows. Well, so the food production economy in Europe is not doing too bad, but these terrible bureaucrats are destroying it. But before we speak about our perception of the coming perspective, let us focus on the situation on the market. And I'm an expert of dairy market. I work for a company which has two private owners. And I'll explain why that is important. In 2021, because of the pandemic, was excellent for our sector because the catering sector was down and people had to eat. So there was a huge demand for our products. In 2022, we had that war in Ukraine erupting. So the influx of women and children accelerated demand, and in our opinion, prices of dairy industry went up too high for some reason. However, discounts offered for food products in some chain stores had the following results. Dairy co-ops with producers with good sales prices were increasing buy prices from producers above a reasonable level. And now, when we have these drastic falls of these prices, it is, in our opinion, these prices were artificially overestimated. And now it is very important to convince producers to sell milk at a price which, in our opinion, is reasonable. We do not have shareholders, members of the COP, who are producers of milk. Now, when we look at the inflation rate at the current level, I mean the base inflation, which is not accounting for food products, because that would drive up the inflation rate, we're saying that's 18.4% of the inflation rate. That's the latest inflation rate. So that's 5 billion extra for the state budget, as the minister admitted. So the proceeds from the inflation are higher than the government's proceeds from the corporate income tax or personal income tax. For poorer people, people of lower means, this inflation shrinks purchasing power of poorer consumers. And there was a 5% drop in the consumption in the past month. In our opinion, the efforts to mitigate that would take long, and people who have some financial reserves will be struggling to keep them. So in our opinion, what we see is as follows. There are no investment coming. And it seems that in the influx of EU funds and the perspective of receiving an EU funds, well, this is not doable, viable, for reasons that I'm not going to comment on. So, well, it seems so that there will be no increases in prices. I said that we were a limited liability company. We do not face challenges which are standard challenges for milk producers these days. Our producers, well, nowadays, today, don't want to accept prices at the level of 1.80, 1.70 per liter of milk, because they were paid 3 zlotys per liter. So dairy co-ops have these contradicting concepts of buy prices. There are quite many co-ops that struggle, but Czarnków co-op is, I think, one of the most recent well-known examples. I think we'll have more of that. So what are producers going to do with milk that they produce if a co-op collapses? Could the government help here? So let us look at 2022 and let us look at profits generated by the multi-energy national holding. I mean, Polish holding, obviously. Obviously, the war caused a rapid change in prices. Now, if this national holding proudly announces profits for 2022 with a consolidated profit with the gas supplier higher by about 30 billion zloty, with cost of processing and cost of distribution, well, someone must pay for it. And with all my due respect to the national champions, this is one of the elements that the government simply abandoned, in the sense that didn't watch carefully. So there could have been some hedging efforts for gas, hedging of gas prices, electricity prices, but still these co-ops are left with their current gas prices and utility prices. Nowadays, the gas comes in as LPG, but still, it's a lot. So we're going to pay more for that, and we're going to pay long for that. Ladies and gentlemen, you are very welcome to ask questions. You are very welcome to give contributions. One more comment. Let me just add that the oil prices on global markets nowadays is 25% lower than before the war with Ukraine. Do you see that at our fuel station? And quite soon we'll have excessive profits of companies taxed. So the state will be taxing these profits generated by the state's policies. So it would turn out that us entrepreneurs were paying all last year this huge, immense energy tax, and that tax demolished the entire enterprise sector. 4.5% drop in the consumption year to year, it's a lot. You cannot compensate for that. So the state will collect billions through that tax, and there will be mass liquidation or mass bankruptcies on the market, like these small dairy co-ops. And the state might help or might not help, but eventually will end up empty-handed. Please give, if you have questions, please ask short questions. Do not give statements. I'm a farmer. Let me repeat my question. What can we do in our production to survive? As we see that everybody cheats on us and we're being robbed. So the EU imposes such restrictions that we cannot continue as we have been so far. Who's going to pay for it? Well, as farmers, we no longer have funds to keep on investing. Anyone would like to answer that? Well, it's a dramatic question. In the context of what is happening, but also in the context of what we call the food security of the country. So, in the context of the country, there will be bankruptcies of companies, enterprises, and farms. Well, this strategy, in a way, will lead to that. So, if we reduce or limit production of food, which is the basic need of a human being, food. Food production is too big to collapse from now on at once. But we will see this internal shrinking of the economy. Then certain formats of farms will be less competitive gradually. In the next year or two, you clearly stated that we were to expect a price war between suppliers and farmers and chains, retail chains. Not very long ago, butter was 9 zloty per 200 grams, and now is 3.5 zloty for 200 grams. So who is the author of that? Well, my idea is that we need to have some progress here in this room. I do see many threats to the food-producing sector in Poland. But let us leave this room with knowledge that we can do more than just complain. It is our role to identify threats and give the message and warn the government, the authorities, about the issues suffered by our breeders, by our food producers, and that is specifically imbalance of competition on the market by uncontrolled impact and dispersion of products. So my big request is let's do something. So let's talk, let's appeal to the European Commission, where we do not need to target the European market with our poultry products. Perhaps we can target that at Africa. There is a number of solutions, and that could be done easily.
To ja wpadnę w słowo, bo oczywiście pan jest prezesem zarządu Krajowej Rady.
Well, obviously, sir, you are the chairman of the National Council of the Poultry Breeders. And let me remind you that I think
od zakończenia II wojny światowej, jeśli dobrze pamiętam, sobie wynotowałem, że kilkanaście dziennie chyba ubywa. No dobrze.
That the number of pig farms is going down, has been going down. So the poultry sector is the largest sector in the EU in this area. It is very well organized, very well structured sector. So one thing is to operate, another thing is to allow uncontrolled volume of meat to the market. Then we will have all these EU regulations imposed. EU has the ambition to offer the highest standards ever. I believe we already have these highest standards, and what we can see in the European propositions, well, that is horrible, because on the one hand, the EU is raising the bar, but on the other hand, such expectations are not imposed on products imported to the EU market. Sir, you propose 4 solutions in your appeal with your message to the Prime Minister. Let me word it like that. It's about doing something to give producers more leeway, more bargaining power in their bargaining and negotiations with retail chains. Well, you wrote that the prices imposed by retail network on Polish producers do not allow for full transfer of production costs on the producers. So who is the guilty one here? Is that are these retail chains, or are these end consumers? People have only as much money as they do. So it's about return on production. If we do not have a yield, a return on production, the production wouldn't make sense. Well, if I may, I would apply to the minister, to the Prime Minister, to answer this simple question. What is the reason for us losing the competitive edge? Well, the retail chains are not that set in their intention. So they might be buying, but they might be buying from someone who offers products at a lower price. So the question is, what happened that we have all the necessary resources and all of a sudden we're no longer competitive? There is this poultry from Ukraine, Denmark, Germany, etc. So these questions must be first answered to come up with a strategy to stop it. Excuse me for saying that, but we operate on the free single EU market. No one is going to impose an embargo, otherwise our products would be banned too. So it's, in my opinion, that is not about retail chains driving the prices down. This year we'll see price wars because they're fighting for sales for clients. And how about clients? Whom do you think the client supports? The client is on both sides because the client would like the production to continue, but then the production must generate generate a return or some profit.
Idziemy do sklepu,
Let us just agree on one thing. When we go to a retail chain that sells meat under their own brand, we have no idea who the initial producer is. Then, all of a sudden, it turns out that the chicken or pork comes from Germany.
Marek, maybe 2 more sentences, because there are questions from the room. Let me refer to the question, what needs to be done, how to change regulations. We took a very straight path. If we are in the EU, whether we are in this EU country or another EU country, we are going to be affected by these regulations. We are looking for markets where raw material is cheap and energy prices will be cheaper, even several times, because that's the situation for the moment. And so the group started to undertake certain actions to diversify, to cut off from EU regulations. Namely, last year, we took over the third biggest dairy plant in Morocco. So costs that we are going to have in Morocco will be better for us. And in our opinion, we'll be able to bypass barriers. So in a way, you are running away, or running ahead, and we are running out of the EU in this way. So 2 questions, Wojtek Ciek-Zienkara, the Institute of Food Economics. We are talking about food security. We are boasting that we have so much expert of food and so on and so forth. But let me mention one thing. There is a certain segment of the food market, namely pork meat production. Poles are used to consumption of a lot of pork meat, like 40 kilos per head, and everything points to the fact that despite various opinions and so on and so forth, this level of consumption is still maintained. And what can we say? Since 2008, well, I guess 2007 was the last one when we had pigs, like 18 million of them. Now there was a huge drop in that. So there is like 9 million pigs. The biggest decline was in smaller herds, up to 200, and 10 million pigs disappeared, let's say. But in bigger herds, there was also this decrease in numbers, but not on such a huge scale. So pigs are in some ways similar to poultry. In poultry, as you were saying, we are a huge power actually in poultry on European scale, at least for now, obviously for now. But when we talk about pigs, out of gross importer, we are becoming net importer. Forgive me for saying that, but I'm looking at my watch. I'm just getting started. I'm just getting started. That's my point. You have to wrap it up because other people may have questions. We import more than 7 million pigs, which are imported, and without that, we would have 6 million only, instead of 9. So my question is, why is that so? Why do we have a situation like that? The number of farms dropped from 700,000. Well, it dropped significantly. It is still going down. Why is it so? Because there are barriers. There are administrative barriers, making it difficult to simply invest in pigsties on a larger scale, and it is the basic condition for efficiency of such production. Then, additionally, there are various actions, protests of neighbors who are bothered by animal husbandry in the countryside. So the prospect is as follows, that we are going to eat pork, but from other countries. Let me just confirm, because the last proposal of a directive on industrial emissions and reduction of emissions will lead to the situation that for pig farmers, it pertained to 62% of pig farmers, and Prime Minister Kowalczyk, together with Janusz Wojciechowski, are trying to go back to the regulations that we had so far, but it simply shows what kind of barriers we are facing at the moment and what kind of barriers we are going to face in the future. Before I ask for the next question, Janusz Dziwulski, I have a question for you. What is your perspective? Because you are an expert looking at this market, so would you say it is really that simple? Because the message seems to be simple in this discussion. Would you say it is a full picture, or the correct picture of the situation, that the EU is either mindless or not reasonable, or perhaps they do things on purpose? Commissioner Wojciechowski is going to defend us, so like huge oppression. It will turn out that it is like EU invasion here. Would you say it is as simple as that? If we talk about the agri-food sector in Poland, if you think about all the factors influencing that situation, well, the agri-food market is very complex, as a matter of fact. I'm being the devil's advocate now, so you have to understand my position. It is not devil, it is bureaucracy. All right, perhaps there might be more difficult cases than that. All right, let us think about these regulations which are being planned. And, well, if we think about that, I haven't seen a publication, I haven't seen a study that would show that implementation of the guidelines in the strategies will not lead to the drop in production. So as the European Union, let me put it differently. Let me put it in a straightforward manner. If there are additional limitations and restrictions connected with animal welfare or limitations connected with plant protection preparations or fertilization, automatically it will lead to the decrease in production. Will it be more elitist? Well, if it is smaller, it will be more expensive. It is usually like that. Yes, absolutely so. It will be more expensive, but the question is, what about competitiveness of the sector? What's about our clash with non-EU markets, where these regulations are not in place, or they are less restrictive? Let me be very specific. The basic parameter defining animal welfare is efficiency per square meter. Now we have the highest requirements in the EU. It is 33 kilopens per square meter. What is FC suggested in the last recommendation for the European Commission? 11 kilo. Organic farming has 21. 11 is suggested now, with no obligation for no obligation like that for imported Brazilian poultry and so on. The first question, you have your own representatives in EU structures, you have lobbying. I cooperated with them when I was the head of the Agricultural Committee. So did you talk about that? Because opening to Ukraine, opening borders, was a political decision, and I'm deeply convinced, well, there will be regulations, because EU cannot afford to have such a huge influx of goods, because it will destabilize the European market. It is a matter of time, even though I've come across negative opinions 7 years ago, and then it was about agri-food products and the trade with Ukraine, and the Trade Committee voted differently than myself. You may remember these famous poultry or chickens with their heads cut off or something. As for problems in the poultry sector, there were great years, like golden years for the poultry sector, many years like that. Would you say the sector was prepared for something else, for a change? It is quite normal that there is always like a collapse or a disaster. Were you prepared for this situation? It is impossible to have golden years only all the time. All right, can we ask for answers, and the mic will go back to you. Okay, so the last question perhaps. I know all of them and they know they will have to answer. I see your point, but I will try to. Okay, yeah. You rule the room. Okay, so perhaps answers first. I'm deputy head of our EU APEC organization, so the question is whether we talk about that. Obviously, we talk about that with EU people, and the matter of Ukrainian import is a problem for the whole Ukrainian Union, for the whole European Union, for the EU member states in general. So we are working on solutions. We are talking to the European Commission. We are talking to the Commissioner on Agriculture and Trade and representatives of the Parliament. We sent to all the MEPs information showing threats and consequences. We are trying to have efficient lobbying, but political correctness is very clear here. So it is an answer to your question about our attempts on the EU level. But do we have to lobby in Brussels? Maybe we can do things on our own. Because in many places I can hear that we can't do this, we can't do that because of EU. And suddenly it turns out that another EU state does something. They can do something. There is an EU-level decision, and now there is a discussion about certain things, because in June there will be 1 year from this change in approach to Ukrainian goods, and now we want to limit, or now we want to suggest alternative solutions, so redirect poultry meat from Ukraine to the markets in which it is necessary, so to the markets where it is needed, without the regulation of the EU market. It is important for me. There is an alternative solution. But we have to convince people about that. Okay, so I will be brief. They are organizations. Yes, we also are active in Food, Drink Europe. If all the commissioners of the European Commission were like you, and I remember you from many years ago, we would have a great dialogue, fully understandable on both sides. But unfortunately, it is not like that. Someone made a political decision, opened markets, and now they are thinking for half a year what regulations should be introduced to try and mitigate the disaster they caused. It is happening everywhere. It is happening with every decision. Let me remind you, last holidays, out of the blue, we learned that the Polish government, so state-owned companies, decided to cease production of CO2 overnight. And we made a lot of efforts to explain to them, to explain to decision makers, to Prime Minister for that matter, to explain to him that without CO2 we would have serious consequences. So it makes sense to write letters to Prime Minister, yes, on Twitter, or if there are cameras, TV cameras, because then it has a huge coverage. Yeah, so someone makes a decision first, blindly, and then they say, oh, I didn't know. Very funny indeed. If it is Deputy Minister for Agriculture who is saying that, he says, oh, I didn't know that we need CO2. So I'm thinking, what are you doing at the ministry if they don't know what to use, how to use, or why we need CO2 in food production? But even one more thing is still more important. The EU, in their goodness, adopted a regulation which allows to give subsidies to many companies in different sectors to energy, to electrical energy, because there are consequences of the war in Ukraine. As a result, we made appeals to Prime Minister together this time. Yes, I have a history of appealing to Prime Minister, and I was saying you have to include the whole food sector in that, because it is a shield accepted by the EU. No way. No way. Thank you. That's a great example. Let me just say what is the final result. German companies, food companies, have electrical energy which is 30 up to 40% cheaper than ours, and people are surprised that networks tell us, oh, we don't want to take it from you, or the retail chains say you have more expensive products, we don't want it from you. So there is always some logic behind things that we need to understand reasons. Yes, so perhaps one more question. What did we do? For so many years, the poultry sector invested hugely, and now we have state-of-the-art technologies, and in the EU, where we are covered by all the regulations and others, we are doing really fine. But we cannot handle the situation in which we are meeting with foul play, because we need to follow certain standards where it is acceptable that there is importation of production without any standards whatsoever.
And it's difficult to prepare when it's non-EU competition or competition outside the EU. Well, after as few as 4 years, and then that's it really. Ladies and gentlemen, be brief. Okay. You said that it is the consumption that is driving the economy, but things are going in the wrong direction. So what are the options and opportunities for continuing the growth of the Polish food export? You spoke about income of the energy sector, so share your income with us. So it would be good to have some details for comparison. What is the option of vertical merger, vertical collaboration? So when it comes to provision of resources and materials so that farmers have a stability of supplies, stable supplies.
To niech pan się odezwie, ale nie dominuje.
Okay.
Dobrze, odnośnie
Please
speak up. Też, żeby nie zabrzmiało, że tylko narzekamy. Natomiast jeśli chodzi o
about the exports,
to z wszystkich prognoz
wynika, że let us look at some forecasts. Well, poultry meat production will be growing due to an increased demand. So far, countries were very conservative when it comes to regional permits to keep birds, to breed birds. Well, the Philippines last year, Japan and South Korea, they agreed to regional status. And then there are more countries coming, wishing to and intending to discuss it. So if we have our costs in the EU at the levels which are beyond competition, then we cannot fight Brazil or the US. Okay, Marek Felbur. Going back to the question about return on our production, it's about 2%. When we look at the return on chains, I don't think I need to convince you that when we assume the risk of production and distribution, 2% is a reasonable, fair, not exaggerated margin. Then, nowadays, our production is sold, is exported at about 50%. Some of that export goes to EU countries and some to remote countries outside the EU. So we're looking at what pays off. We're looking at the return. So my question goes to Mariusz. How about claiming that the Polish exports, the exports of that sector may be going up? There is a leeway. Well, 2% of return in the dairy industry, that's way below the average for the food producing sector. So the dairy industry is not operating towards generating highest performance, in particular so because it cares about its suppliers. But when we look at the return on the food producing industry, that's about 4%. And the data is for 2022-2021. And then, what is typical for food production? That is higher stability when compared to industrial processing. We largely keep on exporting to the EU market. And from the time when Poland joined the EU community, the exports have been growing at 12% a year. Last year, we had this very rapid acceleration of this growth. So the growth reached 27%, and that was propelled by higher prices of food products, of crops. And then when we look at exports volume, well, our optimism seems exaggerated. Well, poultry exports bounced back, but we had that major reshuffle in 2021. There is one exceptional category in the crops export, but otherwise it's re-exporting Ukrainian grain. When we look at the directional structure of the exports, we have been exporting the majority of products on the EU market and to the EU market. So we should reduce our focus on the saturated European market. And I appreciate the efforts of the organization that travels across Europe and across the world and promotes these industries. Well, actually, we compete with members of the co-op, and this is why we are competitive. We do not have members of the co-op who are our permanent or more or less stable partners. So our return would be 1 to 2%, and on this January 1st, the major growth of prices of everything, including gas and packaging. And what next? Well, I wanted to say that I like the moderator's way of moderating this panel. It is very interesting. Oh, I can share my sausage with you. I have my sausage nicely packed in this plastic bag. Well, I had to say that at the very beginning. I had to share that with you. Now I have a question to the panelists. Gentlemen, do you think that we need a national policy addressed at the food-producing sector? If you do, why is that we don't have any, and who should prepare it, and who should be responsible for that? Then we heard this answer to the question about the Polish government. Well, do you think that the Polish government, its ministries and institutions properly represented our sector in Brussels and are competent, responsible, and effective and successful in promoting our interests abroad? If they are not, what should be done to change it? And then, okay, so you started with this nice comment, and then you have all these long lists, huh? And then 3 sentences of my comment. I would hate us to leave this room with this negative attitude towards the European Green Deal and this field to fork strategy. Not long ago, I was participating in a panel debating water, and we cannot discuss farming production, not mentioning climate changes and challenges that come with that. Let's not think only about ourselves. Let us think about our children and grandchildren. Thank you so much. And that was the last question from the floor. We started few minutes later, so I hope that we can finish a bit later.
Na ostatnie pytanie odpowiem odnośnie Europejskiego
So
Zielonego Ładu.
let me just answer this one question about field to fork strategy and about the Polish Green Deal. The Green Deal. Well, access to water, that is something that is going to determine the agricultural production. Let us be very clear. This is an EU institution. The institution proposes 11 kilograms, and the same institution understands that would require much larger consumption of water and much more intensive application of measures.
Ja o strategiach. Znaczy ja mam niewielkie doświadczenie w strategiach, bo w sumie robię w tej branży około 30 lat, więc
I've
jeszcze za mało, żeby
operating in this sector for about 30 years, and it's way too short to see a logical, well-structured strategy. Over that period of 30 years, I've seen some strategies. Some were long-term, some were mid-term, and the issue is no one is pursuing these strategies, and that's the problem. Well, strategies are there, they are created, and when Germans came up with the strategy of for the pork market, they are a strong producer of pork, and every single government follows that. But now we have new strategies with every single government, and that's it really. It starts and ends with a strategy. When you listen about our current debate about food, no one listens to experts. No one consults experts. No one follows and consults practitioners. Politicians are not interested. What about water law? We need more water. We need to save our soil. So, politicians introduced water law. First, they introduced very high fees for consumption of water in the industry to dry us out. And then, 7 years later, this absolutely amazing enterprise called Polish Water was set up, and all that money should have been going to a retention system that would prevent that water flowing to the Baltic Sea to be retained. And 7 years later, well, what happened? Nothing. But we keep on paying our taxes.
No bo nie jest pan w przedsiębiorstwie Wody Polskiej.
You have nothing because out of that, because you're not a member of that Polish water enterprise. It's all very liquid and it's still flowing. So the title of the panel is Challenges and Issues of the Polish Food Producing Sector. We didn't have a single moment in which we would believe that we would tackle all the challenges and issues in the sector. But if you have some optimistic message, please do share it with us. Well, we have our panelists, our guests from a bank. Unfortunately, there is no microphone to the speaker.
Tak, już zmierzam do pana, ale proszę o zwięzłość, bo jesteśmy już po czasie.
Be brief, be concise, please. I have something to show you. I cannot show that to everyone. It's about the price of butter. $2.99 per pack of bar of butter. It's $2.99. So we're talking about food production. So less food, less consumption, less obesity. So let's move move more, let's eat less. Well, I appreciate the English sense of humor, so I think this is the nice way, buzzword to close this panel. I have to finish this panel, otherwise the organizers will cut my head off. So I thank you so much for your active participation. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, guests.
Przypominam, bardzo dziękujemy. Przypominam o jednym raporcie, który jest tu.
Let me just remind you that it's just this report over here, and the other by PKO BP is in a digital form. So go to our website and have a look at it. Thank you.